A police officer was on her last night shift before taking time off to heal from the wounds no one could see. The winter storm had swallowed the town whole when her loyal K9, Rex, began to bark and run into the woods. She followed, thinking it was just another false alarm, until the barking stopped and a faint cry broke through the snow. There, buried beneath the pines, lay a 2-year-old girl, half frozen, whispering a single word: "Mommy." But Officer Grace Miller didn't have a child. She lived alone, haunted by the one she'd lost years ago. So, who was this little girl? What happened that night will break your heart and make you believe that love can find its way back, even through the coldest storm. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Let's see how far this story travels. The winter night had settled thick and unmoving over Pinewood, a quiet mountain town in Oregon, where snow blanketed the rooftops like forgotten prayers. The streets were empty, their lamps dim halos in the swirling mist. A hush hung over the town, the kind of stillness that came before something shifted, before the world decided to wake or break. Officer Grace Miller pulled her patrol jacket tighter, the fur collar brushing her chin as her breath fogged in the cold air. At 35, she had the look of someone who had once laughed easily, but had learned to keep it buried. Her auburn hair was tied back beneath her cap, a few loose strands whipping in the wind. The faint lines around her eyes told stories she didn't speak, of loss, long nights, and the kind of courage that came from surviving what you couldn't fix. Grace had served in Pinewood's police department for 10 years, and the town knew her well, or at least the version she allowed them to see. Calm, steady, always polite, never too close. Few remembered the woman she'd been before the accident, before the call on a rainy night that told her the car carrying her husband and 3-year-old daughter had veered off a bridge. She'd buried the laughter with them. Since then, her life had narrowed to duty, to order, to the soft rhythm of her K9 partner, Rex, trotting faithfully at her side. Rex was a 5-year-old German shepherd, bred from working lines, every muscle honed to discipline and purpose. His black and tan coat shimmered even in the dim glow of the streetlight, his posture alert but calm. To strangers, he looked fierce, intelligent eyes, a muzzle marked by a thin scar from a past mission. But to Grace, he was a heartbeat that never left her side. She trusted him more than she trusted most people. It was nearing 10 p.m. The town slept. Only the soft hum of the radio kept them company, whispering updates from other officers. It had been a quiet shift, no calls, no noise, just the low wind carrying scents of pine and distant smoke. Grace rubbed her gloved hands together. "Almost done, partner," she said softly. "Then we go home." Rex's tail brushed against her leg in response. He was always listening. They moved down the empty road that led to the edge of town. Pinewood faded behind them, its warm windows replaced by the looming forest. Pinewood Ridge, an expanse of dark timber that stretched for miles into the mountains. The locals called it the Breathing Woods, because at night, the wind through the trees sounded like slow, rhythmic inhalation. Grace had always thought it sounded more like whispers. A sign creaked faintly as they passed. Forest boundary. No. Entry after dusk. She smiled thinly. "Guess that doesn't apply to cops, huh?" Rex trotted ahead, nose close to the ground. His ears flicked once, then forward again. Grace's phone buzzed. She glanced down. A message from her mother. "Tomorrow's her birthday. Light a candle?" "For her, sweetheart." Her throat tightened. She turned off the screen and slid the phone back into her jacket pocket. "Not tonight," she murmured. The snow began to fall harder, flakes clinging to her eyelashes, turning the world into soft white blur. She paused at the end of Main Street, looking out toward the tree line. The pines stood tall and unmoving, their tips brushing a sky thick with clouds. Somewhere out there, the forest swallowed a dozen trails and old stories. Hikers who vanished, hunters who swore they'd seen lights flicker deep within. Grace had walked those woods before. They never scared her, but they never welcomed her either. "Let's check the ridge and call it," she said. Rex barked once in quiet acknowledgement and padded forward, his paws making no sound on the snow. As they neared the border of the forest, Grace felt that subtle shift, the one you couldn't name, but always felt when crossing from one kind of silence into another. The stillness here wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. The sound of her own breathing seemed louder, the beam of her flashlight smaller. Rex stopped. Grace almost bumped into him. "What is it?" The dog stood perfectly still, head tilted, ears pricked high. Then, slowly, a low growl began to rise in his throat, quiet but deliberate. Grace frowned, scanning the area. Nothing but trees, the occasional gust of wind. Probably just a raccoon. Rex didn't move. His gaze stayed locked on the shadows beyond the first row of pines. Grace shone her light between the trunks. The beam caught the swirling flakes, but little else. The forest loomed dark and endless. "Rex, heel." No response. Instead, he took one cautious step forward, then another. His nose lifted as he sniffed the air. A second later, he let out a sharp single bark that cracked through the silence. Grace stiffened. "Hey, what did you find?" Rex turned back briefly, his amber eyes glinting in the light, and barked again, louder, this time edged with urgency. Something twisted in Grace's chest. Not fear exactly, but recognition. That tone wasn't his alert to stranger bark. It was his something's wrong bark, the one he used on search and rescue calls when he'd found something that shouldn't be there. The snow fell faster, thickening between them and the tree line. The forest swallowed sound. Grace's breath came in shallow bursts. She crouched beside him, scanning the ground. "What is it, buddy?" Rex's tail stood stiff, his fur bristled slightly along his spine. His ears flicked toward the darkness again. Then he took 3 steps forward, pawing at the ground near the first patch of untouched snow. Grace aimed her flashlight where he stood. The beam landed on a patch of disturbed frost. Faint impressions in the snow that looked too small to be from an adult boot. Her brows knit together. "What the—" The wind whistled through the pines, a hollow, mournful sound that made her skin prickle. Rex barked once more, then let out a low, anxious whine. Grace stood slowly, her hand hovering near her radio. For a moment, she considered calling it in. But what would she say? Officer and K9 investigating suspicious snow? Her instincts whispered otherwise. Years on the force had taught her to trust that whisper. "All right, Rex," she said softly, her voice calm but tense. "Show me." The German shepherd turned back toward the trees. His breath steamed in the cold, ears sharp, tail straight. Then, suddenly, he threw his head back and barked, a deep, echoing sound that rolled through the forest like a warning, bouncing off the pines and vanishing into the dark. The sound made Grace's pulse skip. It wasn't just a bark, it was a call. Something was out there. Grace lifted her flashlight, its beam cutting through the first line of trees. All she saw was the suggestion of shapes, shadows shifting just enough to keep her guessing. Rex barked again, shorter this time, urgent. Grace's jaw tightened. "Okay, easy boy, we'll check it out." But before she could take a step, Rex moved first, padding to the very edge of the woods and stopping beneath the first low branch. He looked back once, eyes bright in the beam, then barked again, louder, his stance rigid. Grace followed his gaze. Beyond the snow, something flickered, a faint, glinting shape far between the trunks. Metal? Ice? She couldn't tell. Her breath caught. The air suddenly felt colder. "Rex," she whispered. The dog's ears pricked forward, his body tense as a wire. The growl returned, low and steady. Grace's heart began to race. Her flashlight trembled slightly in her hand. Somewhere beyond that veil of snow and pine waited the answer to his bark, and whatever it was, it didn't belong to the quiet night of Pinewood. She exhaled, long and slow, the fog of her breath twisting into the air like smoke. "Okay," she muttered. "Let's see what you found." Rex barked again, a sharp echoing cry that pierced the cold and vanished into the woods. Grace stepped forward, the crunch of her boots the only sound left between them. And as the wind rose, stirring the treetops into whispers, she felt it, that strange pull in her chest, as if the forest itself had turned its eyes on her. Something was waiting. Something that would change everything. The wind had changed. What had begun as a calm drift of snow now cut across the forest like shards of glass. The pines creaked under the weight of the storm as Officer Grace Miller moved deeper into the woods, her flashlight slicing weakly through the dark. Beside her, Rex padded silently, his breath clouding the air. The silence had teeth. Grace could feel it gnawing at her nerves with every step. Pine needles crackled beneath her boots, but otherwise there was nothing. No voices, no movement, just the rhythmic whisper of snow falling heavier and faster. "Rex," she murmured, her voice barely louder than the wind. "If this is a false alarm, you're buying the coffee." Rex gave no response, only a quick, sharp bark before darting ahead. Grace sighed and followed, ducking under a low branch. She could see his paw prints glinting faintly in the fresh snow, like a trail of tiny stars. As the trees thinned for a moment, a shape caught the edge of her light, something metallic and unnatural gleaming beneath the frost. Her heart gave a sudden kick. She angled her flashlight down and felt her breath catch. It was a car, or what was left of one. The SUV lay on its side, half buried in snow and crushed against a fallen pine. Its windows were shattered, and the front end was a mangled mess of steel and ice. The white paint was streaked with dark, frozen stains. "Oh, God!" Grace whispered, stepping closer. She brushed away snow from the license plate but couldn't read the numbers. She tried the driver's door. It didn't move, frozen shut. Rex stood at her heel now, tail low, his breath steady but alert. He sniffed the air, ears twitching. Grace peered through the broken glass. Inside, the driver, a woman, was slumped forward over the wheel. Her long, golden brown hair was matted with blood. Strands stuck to the shattered glass around her. She wore a pale blue sweater and a seatbelt still fastened tight across her chest. Her face was turned away, but her skin was as white as the snow outside. Grace pressed a gloved hand to the cold glass. No movement, no breath. The realization hit her chest like a slow, sinking weight. She exhaled and whispered softly, "I'm sorry." Her fingers fumbled for the radio clipped to her vest. "Dispatch, this is Officer Miller. I've got a single vehicle rollover on the north ridge of Pinewood. One confirmed." Static cut her off. The signal had died. Grace swore quietly under her breath. Rex began to pace around the car, nose pressed low to the ground. His movements were restless, agitated. Grace frowned. "What is it, boy?" The dog gave a low whine, then started pawing at the snow near the back seat window. Grace leaned closer, shining her light through the cracked glass. Inside, a child's car seat lay on its side, the straps torn, the seatbelt clip dangling loose. Empty, her stomach dropped. "Rex," she whispered, "you smell someone else." Rex lifted his head, sniffed the air, and barked sharply twice, his signal for yes. Then he trotted around the wreck, nose darting side to side, tail stiff. Grace's pulse quickened. A child, somewhere out here, and if they were still alive in this cold, time was already running out. She looked once more at the lifeless woman in the car and whispered under her breath, "You had someone with you, didn't you?" The wind answered with a mournful moan through the broken glass. Rex barked again, this time further from the road. Grace turned her head sharply. "Rex!" He had moved down the slope toward a darker patch of forest, snow flying beneath his paws. Grace hesitated only a second before following. "Hold on, partner. I'm coming." As she slid down the embankment, her boot struck something hard. She crouched and brushed away the snow, a cracked mirror, maybe from the SUV. It reflected her own face back at her in warped fragments. Her eyes looked older than she remembered, the cold bit through her jacket. She tightened her scarf and quickened her pace. Rex's barks echoed faintly through the storm, leading her deeper. Back at the Pinewood police station, Officer Tom Caldwell sat at the dispatch desk, frowning at the flickering signal on his monitor. Tom was in his early 40s, solidly built, with tired green eyes and a beard that was losing its color to gray. He had worked alongside Grace for years, back when she still smiled easily and shared coffee with the rest of the team. He'd been there the night of the accident, the one that took her family. He'd been the one who found her sitting alone on the curb afterward, rain mixing with tears she never admitted to. He turned the radio dial again. "Unit 7, come in. Grace, do you copy?" Nothing, just static. He leaned closer to the speaker. "Grace, storm's picking up. Visibility's dropping fast. You're in the ridge zone, right? You need to pull back until it clears." Still nothing. Tom exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Damn it, Miller." He looked toward the window, where the snow hammered against the glass. Something about the silence of the line unsettled him. Grace was careful, measured, but she had a stubborn streak that ran deep. He picked up the phone, dialing the ranger station near the ridge. "Yeah, it's Caldwell, Pinewood PD. You got eyes on Miller's unit? No. She's been out there 30 minutes past check-in. If she doesn't radio in soon, I'm sending a team. He hung up, his jaw tight. The static still hissed softly from the radio speaker. Back in the forest, Grace was beginning to feel the cold settle deep into her body. The storm had thickened, and her flashlight beam seemed smaller now, swallowed by the dark. "Rex!" she shouted. The dog barked faintly in response, somewhere ahead. She followed the sound, pushing through the undergrowth. Snow whipped against her face, sharp and relentless. Her hands had gone numb, and her breath came in harsh, bursts that fogged the air before her. Then, she froze. A sound broke through the wind, faint, trembling, human. A cry. Her heart lurched. Oh God! It was soft, almost swallowed by the storm, but unmistakable, the sound of a small child crying. "Rex, hold!" she called, voice trembling. Rex barked again, his tone changing, urgent but hopeful. Grace pushed forward, slipping on the uneven ground, one hand braced against a tree. The cry came again, clearer now, from somewhere beyond the next ridge. "Hang on!" she shouted into the wind. "I'm coming!" Rex bounded toward the sound, leaving a spray of snow behind him. Grace stumbled after him, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Branches whipped at her arms and face. The forest seemed endless, but the cries grew stronger with every step. They crested a small rise, and Rex stopped suddenly, standing at the edge of a shallow ravine. His fur bristled, tail stiff, ears perked toward the darkness below. Grace caught up, panting hard. She shone her light downward, and her breath caught. There, half hidden among the snow-laden branches, was a faint path leading into a narrow, cagey rung, the kind formed by erosion and time. The edges were marked by what looked like small, uneven footprints, barely visible in the storm. Grace crouched, tracing the nearest one with her glove. It was tiny, the size of a child's hand. She felt her chest tighten. "Oh my God," she whispered. Rex gave a low whine, pawing gently at the ground before looking up at her, waiting for her cue. Grace lifted her gaze toward the dark path ahead, where the wind howled like something alive. The cries had stopped now, replaced by the low roar of the storm. Her breath came slow and steady. "All right, boy," she murmured. "We follow." Rex barked once, quietly, then stepped into the narrow gap, his paws sinking into the snow. Grace followed close behind. Behind them, the woods swallowed the world in white. The wind had grown cruel, clawing through the trees, as if determined to erase every trace of life left in the forest. Officer Grace Miller squinted against the snow, her flashlight trembling in her cold, numbed hand. The prints she and Rex had found, those tiny, precious footprints, were vanishing under the relentless storm. Each gust filled them a little more, softening their edges, as though the world itself wanted to bury the truth. Rex moved ahead, his tail low, nose buried deep in the snow. Every few steps he paused, sniffed, and then barked once, short and impatient. Grace followed closely, trying to keep her breathing steady, though each exhale felt like it scraped her lungs raw. "Easy, boy. Take it slow," she murmured, her voice nearly lost to the howling wind. The forest was darker here. The trees grew closer together, their branches knitting into a web that blocked most of the sky. Snow clung to everything, branches, bark, even the smallest rocks, turning the landscape into a world of endless white. Grace adjusted her flashlight, sweeping it across the ground, but the storm made visibility almost impossible. She could barely make out the faint depressions where tiny feet had once stepped. "Damn it!" she hissed softly. "We're losing them." Rex barked again, louder this time. Grace's beam followed him as he veered off to the left, toward a cluster of fallen branches. He sniffed frantically, then began to dig, his paws throwing snow into the air. "Rex, what is it?" She stumbled forward, kneeling beside him. For a moment, she saw nothing but ice and earth. Then, under his paw, a flash of color appeared, a soft, faded pink fabric, half frozen beneath the snow. Grace brushed the surface carefully. It was a child's scarf, small and delicate, its ends embroidered with tiny white stars. She held it up in the light. The fabric was stiff with frost, but the scent, faint, warm, human, still lingered. Her throat tightened. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. Rex whimpered, nudging the scarf gently with his nose, then looked up at her, as if waiting for direction. Grace tucked the scarf carefully into her pocket. "You're doing good, boy. Real good." They pressed on, though the trail was now almost invisible. Grace could feel the storm's fury rising, each gust heavier, sharper. Her fingers ached despite the gloves, and her legs trembled from the effort of trudging through drifts that rose nearly to her knees. She knew they couldn't last much longer in this cold. "Rex, we need shelter," she murmured, but the dog ignored her, driven by something deeper. Instinct, duty, maybe hope. A sudden light flickered ahead, a warm orange glow, faint but real. Grace froze, blinking through the storm. "What the hell?" Rex barked once, tail wagging slightly now. Grace narrowed her eyes. The light flickered again, softer this time, and she realized it wasn't a reflection. It was firelight. Someone was nearby. She quickened her pace, following Rex through the thick snow until the trees opened into a small clearing. Nestled at the edge of the woods stood an old cabin, its roof sagging under years of weight, smoke curling lazily from a stone chimney. The glow came from a lantern swinging outside the door. Grace hesitated a moment, instinctively resting her hand near her holster. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, a stranger's cabin could mean anything. But the cold bit through her hesitation. She needed warmth, if not for herself, then for Rex. As she approached, the door creaked open. A figure stepped into the glow. "Lord, have mercy," the woman said, her voice raspy but steady. "You're out here in this mess?" Grace stopped short. The woman was in her late 60s, tall and wiry, wrapped in layers of wool and flannel that looked older than the cabin itself. Her face was weathered but kind, her gray hair pulled back into a loose braid. Despite the deep lines around her eyes, those eyes were clear and alert, the sharp blue of mountain lakes. "I'm Officer Grace Miller," Grace called over the wind. "We're tracking someone, possibly a child. Have you seen anything unusual tonight?" The woman squinted into the dark, holding up a kerosene lantern. "You mean apart from you stomping around my woods in a blizzard?" she said, her tone equal parts humor and concern. "Name's Martha Dawson, but folks round here just call me Ma Dawson. Been living up this ridge since my husband passed, and believe me, I see plenty of strange things." Grace stepped closer, brushing snow from her jacket. "Ma'am, there's been a car crash near the Ridge Road. A woman's dead. We think a child survived and wandered this way." The woman's eyes softened. "Dear Lord." She turned toward the cabin and gestured. "Get in here before you freeze. I'll grab you a blanket." Grace hesitated, then nodded. She followed Mrs. Dawson inside, Rex close behind. The cabin was small but warm, lit by the soft orange glow of a wood stove. The air smelled of pine resin and something sweet. Apple tea, maybe. The walls were lined with shelves of old books and jars of preserves. A rocking chair creaked softly near the hearth, and a patchwork quilt was draped over a couch by the window. Rex shook himself off, scattering snow across the floor. Mrs. Dawson chuckled. "That's a fine shepherd you've got there. Smart eyes. He's been trained, hasn't he?" Grace nodded, rubbing her hands near the fire. "K9 unit. He's the one doing the real work tonight." "Well," Mrs. Dawson said, handing her a steaming mug. "Then here's to the both of you. Nothing like hot cider to put some life back in your bones." Grace took the mug gratefully. The warmth burned her fingers, but it felt like salvation. She sipped, then asked, "You said you've seen strange things tonight. What did you mean?" Mrs. Dawson frowned slightly, setting down her lantern. "A few hours back, just before the snow came down heavy, I was sitting right there by the stove when I heard something. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but—" She paused, her eyes narrowing. "It sounded like singing, soft, like a lullaby, coming from the woods." Grace's grip on the mug tightened. "Singing?" The older woman nodded. "A woman's voice, gentle, faint." Then it stopped. "Not long after that, I thought I saw light moving between the trees, like a flashlight." Grace exchanged a glance with Rex, whose ears twitched as if he understood. "That must have been me," she said quietly. Mrs. Dawson nodded slowly. "Figured as much. But if you're hearing cries out there, then that poor little one might still be alive." Grace set the mug down and reached for the scarf in her pocket. She handed it to Mrs. Dawson, who held it close to the firelight. You found this out there? Rex did. Mrs. Dawson traced the embroidered stars with her fingers. My heart aches just looking at it, she whispered. Then she turned, grabbing a thick wool blanket from the back of the chair. You'll need this more than I do. Storm's not letting up yet, and if that baby's still out there, she won't make it through the night alone. Grace folded the blanket over her arm, nodding with quiet gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Dawson. We'll keep moving. The trail's faint, but Rex still has the scent. Mrs. Dawson walked her to the door, lantern in hand. The snow outside had piled up nearly to the porch steps. The forest beyond glowed faintly in the reflection of the firelight. She rested a hand on Grace's arm before she left. Be careful, child, she said softly. These woods remember sorrow, but sometimes they give it back as hope. Grace met her gaze, something steady sparking in her chest. I'll find her, she said simply. Mrs. Dawson nodded once, eyes glinting. I believe you will. Rex barked from the edge of the porch, impatient to move on. Grace pulled her coat tighter, adjusted the flashlight, and stepped back into the storm. The snow fell heavier now, each flake catching the beam of her light as she and Rex disappeared once more into the white wilderness. Behind them, Mrs. Dawson stood at the doorway, her lantern casting long, trembling shadows across the snow. Somewhere in the distance, carried faintly by the wind, came a sound she could not mistake, soft, fragile, almost human, a child's cry. The storm had found its full voice now, roaring through the forest like an angry god. The pines swayed and groaned, their frozen branches snapping under the wind's relentless push. The snow no longer drifted, it attacked, blinding and fierce. Officer Grace Miller trudged forward, half bent against the gusts, her flashlight cutting a weak path through the storm. Each breath she drew felt sharp, slicing through her lungs like ice. Rex was a few paces ahead, his fur thick with frost, moving like a shadow against the white chaos. His tail wagged in quick, nervous bursts, his ears flicking back for her voice every few seconds. Stay close, boy, Grace shouted, her voice swallowed by the wind. She glanced down at the small scarf folded in her pocket, the faint pink fabric now stiff with frost. It had become their beacon, proof that the little girl they were searching for was real, alive somewhere in this storm. The thought drove her forward, step by grueling step. The wind shifted suddenly, howling through the trees and cutting visibility to almost nothing. Rex barked once, sharp and insistent. He had caught something. Grace tried to follow, but a heavy branch crashed down ahead, scattering snow in a blinding spray. Rex! She yelled, coughing as the cold bit her throat. When the snow settled, he was gone, vanished into the white. Her heart lurched. Rex! Come! She turned in circles, her flashlight beams slicing through the storm, but all she could see were the ghostly outlines of trees and the endless fall of snow. God damn it! She muttered under her breath. You better know what you're doing, partner. She pulled her jacket tighter, trying to think clearly through the cold. Rex had the scent. If she followed blindly, she could lose herself too. The forest was a maze, and with the storm howling like this, even sound lost its direction. She forced herself to slow down, studying the terrain. The ridge curved downward on one side. If the child had wandered downhill, the wind would have carried her scent there. Grace exhaled and made her decision. All right, Rex, you track. I'll find the shortcut. She began to circle wide around the slope, pushing through knee-deep snow, branches clawing at her sleeves. The storm clawed harder, the kind of cold that numbed before it hurt. Each step was a negotiation with gravity and exhaustion. As she moved, her radio crackled faintly to life. Back at the Pinewood police station, Officer Tom Caldwell sat hunched over the operations console, the glow of the monitors washing his face pale blue. His beard was damp with melted snow from when he'd stepped outside to check the antenna. The screen in front of him displayed a blinking red dot, Grace's GPS unit. It flickered erratically, each pulse weaker than the last. Tom's brow furrowed. Come on, Grace, talk to me, he muttered. He grabbed the mic. Unit 7, you copy? Grace, if you can hear this, the ridge is collapsing. Under the storm. You need to fall back. Static hissed. Then, for a second, her voice cut through, fragmented, thin. Still tracking, can't, leaving woods. Then silence. The red dot blinked once more, then vanished. Tom froze, his hand tightening around the mic. No, 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 no. He turned toward the younger officer on duty, a rookie named Eddie Morales, a 25-year-old with dark curls plastered to his forehead, and a nervous habit of chewing his lip. Get the rescue team ready, Tom ordered sharply. Snowmobiles, med packs, and thermal gear. We'll head to the ridge in 15. Eddie hesitated. Sir, the storm, visibility 0. They said it's suicide to go in now. Tom's jaw tightened. She's out there, Morales, with a kid. You think she's turning back because it's cold? The younger man swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, sir. Tom stared once more at the dead monitor, the static whispering in the silence like a bad omen. He muttered softly, Come on, Miller, don't you dare quit on me. Back in the woods, Grace's world had narrowed to the sweep of her flashlight and the rhythm of her heartbeat. The storm had dulled everything else, sound, sense, thought. She focused only on moving forward, counting each step to keep herself grounded. Then faintly, she heard it. A bark, distant, muffled, but unmistakable. Rex! She shouted, adrenaline pushing fresh warmth into her veins. She turned toward the sound and began to climb the slope again, half sliding, half crawling through the drifts. Keep barking, buddy! Another bark answered, closer this time. Then a whine, urgent. Grace stumbled forward, shining her light ahead, and froze. Through the flurry, she saw him, Rex, half buried in snow near the base of a fallen pine. His body was pressed low to the ground, his fur soaked and clumped with ice. He was lying over something, his front paws braced protectively around a hollow space beneath the tree roots. Oh God, Grace breathed, her throat tightening. She ran the last few steps, kneeling beside him. The beam of her flashlight wavered as her hands shook. Inside the hollow, beneath Rex's body, was a small bundle of pink, a child curled tight against the roots, her tiny hands clutching the corner of a stuffed rabbit. The little girl was no more than 2 years old. Her cheeks were pale, her lips blue, her eyelids fluttering faintly. She wasn't crying anymore, just breathing, barely. Sweetheart, Grace whispered, lowering her face near the girl's. A faint puff of air brushed her cheek. She's alive. Rex whined softly, shifting slightly but not moving away. His whole body trembled from cold, yet he stayed draped over the child, his fur forming a shield against the wind. His eyes lifted to Grace's, glazed but alert, as if saying, I found her. Grace's heart broke and swelled at once. She reached out, brushing snow from his fur. You did. Good boy. You did so good. Her fingers were clumsy from the cold as she checked the child's pulse, weak but steady. She pulled off her outer jacket, wrapping it around the small body, then pressed her gloved hands to her radio. Nothing. The silence was thicker than ever. She looked at Rex again. He was shivering violently now, his fur crusted with ice. Hang on, partner, she whispered. We'll get her out of here. The little girl stirred faintly, a weak sound escaping her lips. It wasn't a word, not yet. Just a small, broken hum. Grace leaned closer, hearing it clearer now. It was the same fragile tune that Mrs. Dawson had described. A lullaby. Her breath caught. That's you, isn't it? She whispered. The one she heard. Snow whipped around them, piling higher. Grace huddled close, shielding both child and dog with her body, whispering reassurance that neither could hear above the wind. Time blurred. Minutes, maybe more. The only sounds were Rex's trembling breaths and the faint whistle of the storm. Grace's flashlight flickered once, dimmed, then steadied again. When she finally dared to move, she placed a hand on Rex's head. I've got her now, she murmured. You can rest. Rex gave a soft grunt of protest, but didn't move away, pressing closer to the child instead. His loyalty was absolute, even in pain. Grace blinked hard, her lashes crusted with ice. You stubborn fool, she whispered with a half laugh, half sob. Fine. We'll do this together. The beam of her flashlight swept across the clearing one last time, illuminating the quiet devastation of the storm, the toppled tree, the untouched snow beyond, and the fragile thread of life they had just pulled from its grip. She pulled the girl gently into her arms, wrapping her tighter in the coat. Rex shifted, pressing against Grace's side, his breathing ragged but determined. Let's go home, Grace said softly. The wind howled in answer, but she didn't stop. With the child in her arms and her partner at her side, she began the long climb back through the snow, leaving behind the hollow that had nearly become a grave. The snow had quieted, but only in sound. The storm still raged, its weight pressing down on every breath, every heartbeat. Officer Grace Miller knelt in the hollow of the fallen tree, her body half curled over the tiny figure in her arms. The world had shrunk to 3 fragile heartbeats, hers, Rex's, and the child's. The little girl, no older than 2, was frighteningly still. Her skin was pale as porcelain, her lips a faint shade of blue. Frost clung to her lashes, and her small hands were stiff around the edge of a stuffed rabbit, its ear torn, its fur stiff with ice. Grace pressed trembling fingers to the girl's neck. There it was, a pulse, weak but steady. "Hang on, baby," she whispered, her breath ghosting in the air. "You're not going anywhere. You hear me?" Her training kicked in through the fog of fear. She peeled off her thick police jacket, then unzipped her inner thermal layer. The cold knifed her chest instantly, but she didn't care. She pressed the girl, Ellie, as the name tag sewn into the rabbit's belly read, against her skin, wrapping both of them in the heavy outer coat. Warmth was survival now, and hers was the only warmth left. Rex stood nearby, his tail low, sides heaving. His dark fur was plastered with snow, and his eyes glowed amber in the weak beam of her flashlight. Grace met his gaze. "Stay close, boy. We've got to keep her warm." He whined softly and stepped nearer, pressing his flank against her leg. His body radiated what little heat he had left. Grace felt it through the thick fabric, steady, loyal, unyielding. She adjusted the coat around the child, her gloved hands fumbling. Ellie made a faint noise then, a whimper so small Grace almost thought she'd imagined it. Her throat tightened. "That's it. You fight, sweetheart. You fight." And just like that, the storm cracked open the past. The wind howled, but beneath it came another sound, not from the forest, not from now, but from years ago. Screeching metal, the sickening crunch of an impact, the smell of gasoline and smoke. Grace blinked hard, and suddenly she wasn't kneeling in the snow. She was back on that highway, rain pouring like needles. She could see herself, younger by nearly a decade, hair plastered to her face, screaming her daughter's name. "Emily!" Her hands, raw and bleeding, clawed at the twisted door of a car flipped on its side. Inside, a child's car seat, crushed, a tiny hand unmoving. The world blurred, the sound fading to a single tone, like the world had stopped breathing. She remembered the paramedics dragging her back, her knees hitting the asphalt, her voice breaking as she screamed into the storm. The last thing she saw before the world collapsed was a pink blanket fluttering from the wreckage, soaking up rain and blood alike. Then, silence. "Grace!" The shout snapped her back. The snow was still falling. Ellie was still in her arms. Rex was still there, his fur pressed against her. Her breathing came fast, ragged. For a second, she didn't know which storm she was in anymore, the one outside, or the one she'd never escaped inside her chest. She pressed her forehead gently against the little girl's. "Not again," she whispered. "Not this time. I won't lose her too." A faint voice crackled through the static on her shoulder radio. "Grace, do you copy? Grace, come in." It was Tom. Her head jerked up. She grabbed the mic, thumb trembling on the button. "Tom, I found her. She's alive, but—" Static swallowed her words. "Grace, respond. What's your position? We're on our way." More static. Grace tried again, shouting over the wind. "She's alive. I repeat, alive, but she's freezing." The line went dead. Only the sound of wind answered. Tom's voice vanished into the storm. She lowered the radio slowly, breathing through her teeth to keep from screaming into the silence. For a moment, all she could hear was the faint wheeze of the child's breathing and the rhythmic thud of her own heart. Rex barked once, sharp, as if reminding her there was no time to despair. Grace nodded, swallowing hard. "You're right." She looked down at Ellie. The girl's skin had warmed slightly, but her breathing was still shallow. Grace pulled the coat tighter and tucked the stuffed rabbit under the girl's chin. "We're going home, baby." She adjusted her flashlight, its beam flickering weakly. Then she turned to Rex. "Rex," she said, her voice steady now, the command cutting through the wind. "Find the car. Find our way back." Rex perked his ears, sniffing the air. His tail lifted just slightly, a spark of energy returning to his stance. He turned toward the ridge, pausing only to glance back once, waiting for her signal. Grace shifted Ellie in her arms. The child's head lolled against her shoulder, tiny breaths puffing against Grace's collar. Each inhale felt like a victory. The first steps were the hardest. The snow had piled nearly to her knees, and every movement sent a wave of pain through her frozen legs. She focused on Rex's tail, the only constant thing ahead in the blinding white. "Keep going, boy," she panted. "Get us home." The storm seemed to push back against them, roaring in protest. Her flashlight flickered again, sputtering, casting long, broken shadows over the trees. The light grew weaker until only a faint, trembling circle remained, barely enough to see Rex's outline. Every few steps, she thought she heard something. Voices, perhaps, or just the wind playing tricks. She didn't know anymore. Time stretched and blurred, and the forest became a labyrinth of snow and noise. She stumbled once, her knee hitting the frozen ground. Ellie stirred and whimpered weakly. Grace bit down hard, ignoring the pain, and pushed herself upright again. "Almost there," she whispered hoarsely. "Almost home." Rex barked once, a sound that carried determination. His fur was rimed with ice now, but his movements stayed strong and sure. He was leading them with pure instinct, following memory, scent, and something deeper, faith. Behind them, the forest seemed to close, swallowing their footprints as soon as they were made. Ahead, the night stretched on, merciless and endless. The flashlight flickered once more, its light dimming to a dull pulse. Grace tightened her hold on Ellie, pressing the child closer to her chest. "Don't go out on me," she muttered, not sure if she meant the light or herself. "Rex," she called, "show me the way." The shepherd turned back briefly, eyes glowing amber in the dim light. Then he barked twice, as if to answer, and pushed forward into the white haze. Grace followed, the beam of her light catching the snowflakes that danced like ghosts before fading into the dark. "Rex, lead us home!" she shouted again. The last thing visible was the faint beam of her flashlight, blinking like a fragile heartbeat against the storm. Then, just as the wind howled louder, swallowing the world whole, the light wavered, flickered, and went out. The storm was a living thing now, a beast of white fury that clawed at the trees and howled through the ravines. The snow came sideways, the wind shrieking like 1,000 ghosts, and the world beyond 2 feet was gone. Grace Miller staggered forward through the chaos, the weight of the child heavy in her arms, every muscle screaming for mercy. Ellie's tiny face was pressed against her neck, cold skin against cold skin, her breath so faint they might vanish if Grace stopped listening for even a second. Rex was a dark blur ahead, his fur dusted with frost, his movements growing slower as exhaustion dragged at him. He kept glancing back to make sure Grace followed, his eyes glowing amber through the swirling snow. "Keep going, boy," she called hoarsely. "We're almost there." Her words vanished into the wind, meaningless against the roar of the storm, but Rex seemed to understand. Each step was a battle. The snowdrifts reached her thighs now, and the ice beneath the powder made footing treacherous. Grace's legs were numb, her arms trembling as she clutched Ellie tighter. The child's weight felt heavier by the minute, though Grace knew it was only her own body giving up. She tried to focus on Rex's tail, on the small flicker of movement that meant she wasn't alone. But the light from her flashlight had long died, and now only instinct guided them. A gust slammed into her side, hard enough to throw her off balance. She stumbled, boots slipping on the hidden ice beneath the snow. "No, no, no," she gasped, tightening her grip on Ellie as her body pitched forward. Her knees hit first, then her shoulder. The pain was dull, distant, as if her body no longer belonged to her. The world spun white, and for one terrifying second, she almost let go. Rex barked sharply from ahead and turned back, bounding through the snow. He reached her in seconds, his body colliding with hers, his muzzle shoving against her arm. Grace tried to push herself up, but her strength failed, and the child in her arms began to slip. "No!" she cried, her voice breaking. Rex lunged, teeth finding the sleeve of her coat. He bit down, not to harm, but to hold, and pulled with all his might. Grace's body jerked upward as the dog strained, paws digging deep into the snow. Her arm burned where the fabric tore, but she didn't care. With a final desperate push, she rolled onto her knees, clutching Ellie close again. For a moment, she could only stare at Rex through the blur of snow and tears. His muzzle was flecked with frost, his chest heaving with exhaustion. Yet his eyes were fierce, alive. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Good boy." Rex barked once, tail wagging weakly, then turned to face the storm again. He pressed forward, breaking a path through the snow, every step deliberate. Grace followed, half crawling, half stumbling, driven only by the sight of him pushing onward. At the Pinewood police station, the generator rattled against the howling wind. Snow beat against the windows like desperate fists. Inside, Tom Caldwell stood over the comms table, his jaw tight, one hand gripping the edge so hard his knuckles had gone white. The radio hissed with static, its red light flickering weakly. Across the room, 2 rescue volunteers, Bobby Hayes and Linda Tran, were gearing up in heavy snow gear. Bobby, a broad man with dark stubble and eyes like steel, adjusted his helmet straps, his voice steady, but grim. "Last ping from her GPS puts her just north of the ridge, but that storm's killing the signal. We'll have to go by ear." Linda, lean and sharp-eyed, checked the batteries on her portable siren. Her black hair was tied tight in a braid, snow already clinging to her sleeves. If she's near the main road, she might still hear the alarm, but with the wind like this... Tom cut her off, his voice low but full of urgency. "Do it anyway. If there's even a chance she's close, she'll hear it." He turned to the console, adjusting the old frequency dial on the side radio. It was an ancient backup unit, World War II-era tech, patched together with duct tape and stubborn hope. He tuned it to the emergency band Grace's radio was last connected to. "Grace, if you can hear this, hang on. We're coming for you. Just hold your light high." Static answered him. Tom's reflection in the frosted glass looked like a ghost. Lined face, weary eyes, shoulders hunched with guilt. He had sent her out there, he knew it, and now she was somewhere in that storm, maybe dying. He slammed a fist on the console. "God damn it, Grace!" Bobby's voice broke the tension. "We're ready." Tom nodded, swallowing hard. "Fire up the siren, keep it low and steady. It'll carry further that way." Linda flicked the switch. A long, low wail filled the station, then spilled out into the white world beyond. It wasn't the frantic shriek of an emergency. It was deeper, slower, like a beacon in the dark. The sound rolled through the forest in waves, echoing off the ridges. Tom leaned close to the mic again. "Grace, if you can hear the siren, follow it. We're waiting. Just hold on." Out in the storm, Grace stopped dead in her tracks. Through the roaring wind came a sound, low, mournful, rising and falling. For a moment, she thought she was imagining it, that her mind was breaking under the cold. But then it came again, longer this time, unmistakable. A siren, her breath hitched. "Tom," she whispered. Rex lifted his head, ears twitching toward the sound. He barked twice, a hopeful sound that cut through the storm. Grace tightened her grip on Ellie. "That's the station, boy. That's them. We're close." She forced herself forward, following the faint sound that drifted between the gusts. Every few steps it faded, then returned again, leading her like a thread through the blizzard. But her strength was fading fast. Her arms felt numb, her legs like they were filled with lead. The warmth she'd felt earlier had turned into a dangerous, deceiving heat. The kind that came before the cold claimed you. She stumbled once, caught herself, then stumbled again. The third time, she couldn't recover. Her knees hit the snow hard. She clutched Ellie tighter, her head spinning. "No, not now." Rex barked frantically, circling her, pawing at her arm. She tried to push herself up, but her body refused to obey. Her vision narrowed, the edges going soft and white. Somewhere far away she thought she heard Tom's voice again, through the static of memory. "Hang on, Grace. We're coming." Her lips parted, but no sound came. The siren had faded again. The storm had swallowed it whole. Rex pressed against her side, whining, his muzzle brushing her cheek. She could feel his heart pounding through the layers of fur and fabric, fast and desperate. She wanted to move, to keep going, but her limbs were heavy as stone. The child in her arms barely stirred now. Grace lifted her head, forcing her eyes open. The faint outline of the road appeared ahead, a gray smudge through the storm. She was close. So close. Rex, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Please, go. The dog froze, head tilted, confusion flickering in his eyes. Go, boy, she said again, tears freezing on her lashes. Find them, bring them here. Rex whined once, low and uncertain, as if refusing to leave. Grace reached up with a trembling hand, brushing the frost from his fur. Please, she breathed. For a long moment, the storm was the only thing that moved. Then, slowly, Rex stepped back, turning toward the direction of the siren's echo. His tail rose, his body trembling, and he barked once, a promise. Then he ran. His paws tore through the snow, his body vanishing into the white void. Grace watched until she couldn't see him anymore, then lowered her head, clutching Ellie to her chest. The siren wailed faintly in the distance. The storm howled back. And somewhere ahead, Rex ran through the darkness, chasing hope with everything he had left. The night was a sheet of white fire, a storm raging so fiercely that even sound seemed to shatter against it. Snow whipped across the frozen clearing, swallowing tracks faster than they could be made. Through that blinding chaos, a dark figure tore through the drifts with desperate speed. Rex, the German shepherd, running like the wind itself carried him. His fur was matted with ice, his paws bleeding from the frozen ground, but he didn't slow. His breath came out in ragged bursts, hot against the cold, leaving small ghosts of steam in his wake. He had left his partner behind. Every instinct screamed at him to go back, to stay and protect. But her voice, hoarse, weak, fading, still echoed in his ears. Go, Rex! Find them! So he ran. The forest blurred around him, trees bending under the wind's weight. His vision flickered between light and shadow, small glimpses of the open road beyond the woods, the faint glow of headlights in the distance. He pushed harder, heart pounding like thunder in his chest. The first sign of the outpost appeared through the white haze. A wooden ranger checkpoint cabin, half buried under the storm, a single lantern flickering in the window. Rex stumbled once, then leapt the final drift, landing hard near the snowmobile tracks. He barked, a sharp, hoarse cry, and then again and again, his voice raw from the cold. Inside, Linda Tran was the first to hear it. The young volunteer had just stepped away from the radio when the barking cut through the wind like an alarm. She froze, eyes widening. Tom, did you hear that? Tom Caldwell, standing by the door in full rescue gear, turned sharply. The sound came again, closer, frantic, insistent. He yanked open the door, the wind slamming into him like a wall. Rex! He shouted into the white. Out of the storm burst the dog, stumbling, half frozen, but alive. He skidded across the snow, barking wildly, circling the snowmobile headlights. His eyes, glowing with desperate intelligence, locked onto Tom. Oh my God, Linda gasped. He made it back. Rex barked once more, then turned toward the forest, running a few steps before looking back, urging them to follow. Tom didn't hesitate. Get the med packs. She's close. Within minutes, the rescue team was mounted up. Tom rode point, his snowmobile engine screaming into the wind, the beam of its headlight slicing through the storm. Bobby followed close behind with Linda, the siren emitting long, low wails that rolled through the trees like a lifeline. Rex ran ahead, his paws hitting the snow in rhythm with the machine's engine, guiding them through the dark labyrinth of the woods. Stay with him, Tom shouted over the roar. If that dog stops, we stop. They followed him for what felt like forever, until the forest began to thin and the wind eased just slightly. Then, through the flurry, they saw it, a dark shape in the snow near the base of a hill. Tom's heart clenched. He killed. The engine jumped off, boots sinking deep. Grace! There she was, collapsed in the drift, her arms wrapped tightly around the child. Snow clung to her lashes, her face pale, lips nearly colorless. The girl, Ellie, was motionless, wrapped in Grace's torn jacket. Tom dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he checked for a pulse. Come on, come on. Faint. But there. She's alive, he shouted. Get the blankets now. Bobby sprinted over, unfolding the thermal sheets and wrapping them around both Grace and the child. Linda dropped beside them with a portable heater and oxygen mask. Her hands trembled, but her voice was calm. Kid's breathing shallow. Get her in the ambulance now. Tom pressed a hand to Grace's shoulder, voice breaking. "You did it, Miller. You held on." Rex stood beside them, panting heavily, his front paw bleeding where ice had sliced deep. Yet he didn't rest. He nudged Grace's face gently, whining low, as if begging her to wake. "Good boy," Tom whispered, his throat tight. "You brought us home." The flashing red and blue lights cut through the storm as the ambulance roared down the mountain road. Inside, warmth and chaos mingled in equal measure. Grace lay half reclined on a stretcher, an oxygen mask pressed to her face, her skin pale but alive. Beside her, on the opposite gurney, Ellie lay swaddled in layers of blankets, a tube feeding warm air beneath her covers. Her tiny chest rose and fell in rhythm with the beeping of the monitor. At Grace's feet, Rex lay curled on the floor, his fur damp but his eyes half closed with exhaustion. A makeshift bandage wrapped around his paw where Linda had stopped the bleeding. Tom sat between the two stretchers, still in his snow gear, his face drawn but relieved. The medic across from him, a man named Dr. Sam Keating, early 40s, with calm gray eyes and the kind of steady hands that spoke of years in emergency rooms, adjusted Ellie's oxygen flow. "How's she doing?" Tom asked. Dr. Keating glanced at the monitor. Her temperature's rising slowly, pulse is weak but steady. Another 20 minutes she would have been gone. He looked toward Grace. "And your officer here's not far behind. Severe hypothermia, early frostbite on the fingers. But she'll make it." Tom exhaled, running a hand over his face. "That's the first good thing I've heard all night." The doctor gave a small, tired smile. "You can thank that dog. He saved all three of them." Grace stirred then, her fingers twitching against the blanket, her eyes fluttered open, dazed. For a moment she looked around, disoriented by the flashing lights and the hum of the engine. "Hey," Tom said softly, leaning closer. "You're safe now?" Her lips moved behind the mask. "Ellie?" Tom turned slightly. "She's right here." Grace turned her head, her eyes finding the small figure on the stretcher beside her. The sight broke something inside her, the soft rhythm of the breathing mask, the rise and fall of the tiny chest. "She's alive." "She's alive," Tom confirmed. Rex lifted his head weakly at her voice, his tail giving a faint thump against the floor. Grace reached down, brushing her fingers through his fur. "You did it, partner," she whispered. "You saved her." The German shepherd gave a small, contented sigh and rested his head back down. The rest of the ride passed in silence, save for the hum of the heater and the sound of two heartbeats, one steady, one fragile, against the rhythm of the road. By dawn, the storm had broken. The sun rose pale and uncertain over the white-drenched town of Pinewood, its light softening the hard edges of the night before. In the small mountain hospital, the air was quiet except for the faint beeping of machines and the murmur of nurses moving down the hall. Grace lay in a hospital bed, her hands wrapped in bandages, her skin flushed with warmth again. Rex rested at her bedside, his injured paw neatly dressed, a small patch of fur shaved for treatment. The news had spread quickly through the town. The hero dog who saved a lost child and his officer. Tom stood by the window, coffee in hand, the lines of exhaustion softening just slightly as he looked back at them. "Whole town's talking about you too," he said with a faint smile. "You're famous." Grace gave a tired laugh. "Give Rex the medal. He earned it." As if on cue, Rex lifted his head, tail wagging once before curling back up beside her. A nurse entered quietly, her face bright with news. "Officer Miller, the little girl's awake. The doctor thought you'd want to know." Grace's heart skipped. "Ellie?" The nurse nodded. "She's asking for you." Grace hesitated, emotion flooding her chest. "For me?" The nurse's voice softened. "She called out a name when she opened her eyes." Grace's lips parted. "What name?" The nurse smiled gently. "Mommy." For a long moment, Grace couldn't speak. Tears welled and spilled silently down her cheeks. Her hand found Rex's fur again, gripping gently, grounding herself in the quiet miracle that had somehow unfolded from the storm. She whispered, half to him, half to herself. "We brought her home, didn't we?" Rex's tail thumped once against the sheets, a quiet, steady answer. And for the first time in years, Grace let herself cry. Not from grief this time, but from the fragile, healing weight of love rediscovered. Spring came shyly to Pinewood that year, as if afraid to disturb the silence left by winter's long rain. The mountains still wore their caps of snow, but the trees had begun to show the tender green of new life. The air carried the scent of pine and thawing earth, and the sound of birds, small, hesitant songs, fluttered between the branches. Officer Grace Miller stood on the hospital's front steps, the same place she had walked through a month before, on shaking legs and frozen hope. Today the world felt softer. The sky stretched wide and clean above her, and her breath no longer fogged when she exhaled. Rex stood beside her, healed but still carrying a faint limp in his right foreleg. His fur shone golden brown in the sunlight, brushed and clean, the hospital staff having treated him as much a hero as any human. He wore a new collar, dark leather with a silver tag that read, Rex, Hero Dog of Pinewood. Grace knelt and ran her fingers through his fur. You ready to see her, partner? Rex gave a soft bark, tail wagging once, slow and steady. Inside the pediatric wing, the walls were covered in murals, cartoon forests, smiling animals, sunshine painted in wide strokes. The scent of disinfectant mingled with that of crayons and orange juice. Grace followed the nurse down the hall, the quiet tap of her boots echoing against the linoleum. Ellie's been doing very well, the nurse said kindly, her name tag reading Jenna, a young woman with auburn hair tied in a bun and freckles sprinkled across her nose. Her body's recovered completely, and her new guardians are coming to visit this weekend. But she keeps asking for a certain police officer and her dog. Grace smiled faintly. I had a feeling. Jenna paused at the door with a small grin. She's just inside. I'll give you two some time. Grace pushed the door open quietly. Sunlight spilled across the room, catching the dust motes in midair like tiny stars. On the hospital bed sat a little girl with soft curls the color of wheat, wearing a pale yellow dress and holding the same battered stuffed rabbit she'd clung to in the storm. Ellie. When she saw Grace, her eyes widened, blue and bright like morning sky after a blizzard. For a heartbeat, she just stared. Then her lips broke into a smile so pure it made Grace's chest ache. Mommy! The word hit her like a wave. Ellie dropped the rabbit, arms reaching out. Grace froze, tears welling despite herself. Hey there, sweetheart, she whispered, crossing the room. She sat on the edge of the bed, and Ellie wrapped tiny arms around her neck with a strength that belied her size. Grace held her tight, eyes closed, breathing in the scent of soap and baby shampoo, feeling the warmth that still seemed like a miracle. When she finally pulled back, Ellie's gaze darted past her and lit up again. Doggy! Rex, ever gentle despite his size, stepped forward. His ears perked, and he gave a soft woof as if saying, Hello? Ellie reached out a hand, and he lowered his head, letting her small fingers pat his nose. He remembers you, Grace said softly. Ellie giggled. Doggy cold nose. Grace laughed, really laughed for the first time in months, and wiped at her eyes. Yeah, that's him. The nurse peeked in from the doorway, smiling at the sight. She hasn't smiled that big in weeks. Grace smiled back, whispering, Neither have I. They stayed like that for a long while. Grace told Ellie stories, how Rex once chased a raccoon right into a trash bin and got stuck, how the snow had melted on the ridge and turned the world into silver rivers, how sometimes, when it's quiet, you can still hear the mountains breathe. Ellie listened with rapt attention, her head resting on Grace's arm, her fingers tangled in Rex's fur. When the nurse returned to bring lunch, Grace stood reluctantly. I'll come see you again soon, okay? Ellie's little face fell. You promise? Grace bent down and brushed a curl from her cheek. I promise. Ellie nodded solemnly. Bring Doggy too. Rex gave a low bark, tail thumping the floor, sealing the promise. Later that afternoon, Grace walked out of the hospital into the soft glow of sunset. The world seemed awash in gold. The snow on the peaks reflected pink light, and for the first time in years, she felt something lift inside her, something light, warm, and steady. Tom Caldwell was waiting by his truck near the curb, leaning against the hood with 2 cups of coffee steaming in his hands. His rugged face softened as he saw her, and he handed her 1 cup without a word. Thought you might need this, he said. Grace smiled. Still black and too strong, he grinned. Wouldn't have it any other way. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the horizon. The streets of Pinewood were quiet now, the storm a fading memory. People had begun hanging flower boxes in windows. Kids were back on bikes, and the town seemed to have remembered how to breathe again. "How's she doing?" Tom asked finally. Grace took a slow sip. "She's amazing, walking, laughing, calls Rex doggy, calls me." She trailed off, smiling faintly. Tom raised an eyebrow. "Mommy?" Grace nodded, eyes glinting. "Yeah." He chuckled softly. "Seems like she's got good taste." She nudged him with her elbow. "Don't start." Tom's gaze lingered on her, quiet and thoughtful. "You did good out there, Grace. You both did, and not just because you saved her." Grace looked at him, puzzled. "Then what?" He shrugged lightly. "Because you came back too." The words hit deeper than she expected. She looked away, blinking against the sting of tears. Tom cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "So, I was thinking, there's that new cafe down on Pine Avenue. Good coffee, terrible pie. Maybe we find out just how bad it really is?" Grace smiled, a small, real smile. "You asking me out, Caldwell?" "More like a celebration of survival," he said, half grinning. "But I won't argue with interpretation." She chuckled, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "Persistent," he corrected. Rex barked once, tail wagging, as if casting his vote in Tom's favor. Grace laughed again, the sound blending with the quiet hum of spring. "Fine," she said. "One coffee, no promises about the pie." A week later, under a sky so blue it seemed freshly painted, Grace found herself in Pinewood Park. The grass was soft and damp beneath her boots, and the trees swayed gently in the mountain breeze. Ellie ran across the open field in her little denim overalls, her laughter bright and wild as she chased a red ball through the grass. Rex trotted alongside her, his limp nearly gone, patient as ever. Every few steps, Ellie would stop, wrap her arms around his neck, and declare triumphantly, "Doggy mine!" Grace sat on a bench nearby, coffee in hand, the sun warm on her face. Tom was supposed to meet them soon, but for now, she just watched Ellie's curls bouncing in the wind, watched Rex's tail swaying, watched the sunlight dance between them like an old friend. There was peace here, the kind that didn't shout or demand. It just existed, quiet and full. When Ellie threw the ball too far and ran after it, Grace called out gently, "Don't go too far, honey." The little girl turned, grinning, her cheeks flushed. "Okay, Mommy." Grace froze for a second, not out of pain this time, but awe. The word no longer felt like an open wound. It felt like sunlight. Rex came trotting back, ball in mouth, and dropped it at Grace's feet. She smiled down at him, scratching behind his ears. "You did good, partner," she said softly. "You always do." He gave a soft huff and rested his head on her knee, content. Grace leaned back on the bench, watching Ellie spin in circles under the light, her laughter echoing through the park. A breeze rustled the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and wildflowers. She looked toward the horizon, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Sometimes," she said, almost to herself, "love finds you in the storm." And as Rex dozed at her feet and Ellie's laughter carried through the air, Grace Miller, once broken by loss, finally smiled with the quiet certainty of someone who had found her way home.